So we're going to start with the organisation of the body. And we're going to start at the lowest level and work our way up. So we start at the smallest level, is the cells in the body. And these are further divided then into differentiated cells. And these cells have specialist functions. So all the cells have different things to do within the body, and they become specialist cells as a result. Now these cells then form tissues, of which there are 4 different types. So the tissues are groups of cells with related functions. And as I say, there's 4 types. So you've got muscle, you've got nervous cells, you've got connective cells, or connective tissues, sorry, and you've got epithelium. And we'll come across all these different types of cells as we go through the physiological systems. So up from tissues, we've then got organs, and these form functional units. So an example of that is the kidney. And obviously we could talk about the heart and the lungs, etc., etc. Then up from the organs, you've got an organ system. Which are several organs which act together to perform a specific function. And an example of that would be the renal system. So the renal system comprises the kidneys, the bladder and the ureters. So they perform a very specific function. So let's move on a little bit, and we're going to move on now to fluid compartments. There are 2 main fluid compartments in the body. And we can see on the drawing below how that is divided. So what are the 2 fluid compartments? Okay, well you've got the ICF and you've got the ECF. And what are those 2? Okay, well the ICF, or the intracellular fluid, is all fluid within the cells. So fluid actually contained within the cells, and that's in the cytoplasm, which is bounded by the plasma membrane. So the membrane surrounding the cell contains the cytoplasm inside it, which itself constitutes the intracellular fluid. So you can see that this here represents the membrane, and this represents 2/3 of total body water. So it forms the largest part of the total body water. So ECF, what is ECF? ECF is the extracellular fluid. So if the intracellular fluid is a fluid within the cells, the extracellular fluid is the fluid immediately outside of the cells. So fluid outside of the cells. And obviously if this is 2/3 of the total body weight of water, then this is only going to comprise 1/3. So most of the fluid is actually inside the cells. And there's a number of key elements inside and outside of the cells that we're going to encounter quite a lot. So inside the cell and outside the cell we've got potassium and sodium. Now inside the cell, potassium is in quite high concentration and sodium is in quite low concentration. Outside the cell we've also got potassium and sodium, positively charged ions, and they're the opposite way round. So that would be low concentration outside and high sodium concentration outside. The ECF, or the extracellular fluid, can be further divided. There's two more divisions for it. You've got the intravascular fluid, which has got proteins in it, which play an important role in fluid balance. And then you've got the interstitial space. And that's the space between the cells and the vasculature. So that's between the cells and the vasculature. And this is usually filled with a connective tissue. Okay, let's just clear that for now. Clear it. So it's important to know, let me just move my page up a little bit here. It's important to know that there is a disequilibrium. Let me rub that out, that's rubbish. Do that again. There is a disequilibrium between the extracellular fluid and the intracellular fluid with the iron concentration. So this is the concentration between the sodium and the potassium inside the cell and the sodium and the potassium outside of the cell. And this is important when it comes to things like electrical activity and movement of fluid in and out of the cell. And we'll see later on with how this physiology becomes important. But this disequilibrium needs to be maintained because there are channels which allow potassium to leak slowly out of the cells, slowly out of the cells into the ECF. So this potassium needs to be moved back into the cells. So this is maintained by something called ATPase, which is an enzyme, and this uses energy, and it moves 3 sodium out, out of the cell, and 2 potassium into the cell. And this is the sodium potassium pump that you may well have heard of. And what does this do? Why does this happen? Well, this just ensures that the amount of sodium potassium outside the cell is different to that inside. So it ensures the disequilibrium is maintained. And as I said, this will become important later on. So just to go back to the constituents of the water within the different compartments, we can just break it down. We know that the total body water, is equivalent to about 60% of body weight. And so that was equivalent to 42 litres in a 70 kilo man. So we can work out from that how much is in the intracellular fluid and how much is in the extracellular fluid. So intracellular fluid, which is that fluid inside the cell and mainly cytoplasm, which we know is 2/3 total body water. If we do the maths, that means that in a 70 kilo man we've got approximately 28 litres of intracellular fluid. The extracellular fluid, that which surrounds the cells, and we know that that is 1/3 total body water, is going to be equal to about 14 litres in a 70 kilo man. And then a final point on this, that the intravascular fluid, or the IVF, that is the fluid inside the circulation, so the blood, if you like, plasma and blood, is actually only 1/12 of the total body water. So actually the plasma and the blood forms only a very small part of fluid volume. Okay, so let me just clear that. So we've just talked about compartments there and the constituents of those compartments. Okay, so let's move on to talk about homeostasis. What is homeostasis? So homeostasis is simply the maintenance of extracellular fluid constituents as a relative constant. So the body needs to try and maintain the extracellular fluid, or the constituents in the extracellular fluid, at a fairly constant level for the body to function properly. And there's a number of factors that need to be kept in a pretty tight range in that extracellular fluid. So what are those things that need to be kept in a tight range? Okay, CO2, carbon dioxide, a waste gas. Oxygen, obviously very important for the cells to function properly, for them to be able to metabolize. Glucose, again, an important substance for the body to be able to function properly. The hydrogen ions need to be maintained at a constant level. The body doesn't like it if they get too high or too low. That affects the pH of the body. It's directly related to the pH, and the body won't function well if the pH starts to move outside the range. And just as an aside, the pH range should be 7.35 to 7.45, and if you ever encounter blood gases, that's something that you'll come across quite regularly. And then also the temperature needs to be maintained at a fairly constant level. And the problem is with all these things that as we go through our daily life, we're going to be bringing in lots of constituents that are going to be causing problems. So we bring in a diverse range of materials are brought into the body, and we need to make sure that the balance of these stays at a fairly constant level. The body doesn't like it if the balance starts to change. So the homeostasis, the function of homeostasis, is to try and make sure that this maintains at a fairly constant level, all these factors here. Okay, so the ECF consequently acts as a buffer zone. And what happens is that the organs of the body are all working, are acting on the ECF to try to keep the range constant. Because if the balance is not maintained, then that's what leads to illness or pathophysiology. Okay. Okay, so we just clear that now. So there you go. We've talked about the constituents, the fluid compartments. We've talked about the need for the extracellular fluid to keep at a constant level, and that's what homeostasis is. I'm just going to move on quickly now to talk about something called reflex loops, because this is something also that's very important within the body to make sure that the body can react to certain changes. So there's 3 to 4 elements in any reflex loop, which we can talk about, and we'll talk a little bit about reflex loops again in probably the next one. So let's start with, at the top of the reflex loop is the integration center, and in the body that's usually the brain. Then we move down to the effectors in the body, and these are the ones that respond to messages from the integration center, from the brain if you like, and this is called the efferent or efferent pathway. you have the stimulus, and then on the other side we're going to have the sensor. And I'll talk about this in a bit more detail in a moment. Let's just get this diagram written down first. And this is known as the afferent pathway. And then the sensor goes back to the integration center. So what's going to happen here? Well, what's going to happen is that there's going to be a stimulus of some description. So the body gets cold, or the blood sugar starts to drop, and this is sensed through the afferent pathway by a sensor. This sensor then sends the signal back to the integration center, into the brain in our case. The brain then makes a change of some description and then sends something out to the effectors to say you need to respond. It makes a response which then reduces the stimulus. And we can do one or two examples of this. But if we just go into a little bit more detail again with that, I think I might need to clear that now. So what happens is the sensor will detect a specific signal. Oh, sorry. Signal or stimulus and this sends a signal to the integration center or brain. The brain is very clever because the brain contains set points that are compatible with life. And what the brain will then do, it'll then evaluate the signal with the set point. To see if it is higher or lower than the set point. If it is higher or lower than the set point, then the brain will send a signal down the efferent pathway which will stimulate a response. So you can see there that this feedback. There's a feedback mechanism going on here, and feedback mechanisms are very important in the body, and you can see through this process here why. So it's a combination of the integration center, the effectors, the sensors, and the stimulus, or the efferent and the afferent pathways. So that's something that's going to come up quite a lot when we talk about some of the systems in the human body. So we've quickly talked about the organization of the body, from the cells up to the organ systems. We've talked about the fluid compartments and the constituents of those two, the ECF and the ICF. We've talked about what levels of fluid constitute the total body water. So in a 70-kilo man, we had 28 litres was the ICF and 14 litres was the ECF, and only a very small part was the intravascular fluid. We've talked about what homeostasis is and the need for it, and then finally we've talked about reflex loops in this video. I hope that makes sense, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.